Hi guys. Tonight, we're heading straight into the chill of history's coldest corridors. You imagine stepping out onto a snow-crusted path, the kind that crunches underfoot and immediately seeps icy dampness into your boots. The wind cuts your cheeks raw. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you realize this is the sort of environment where your phone battery would die in 3 minutes flat, except you don't have a phone, or a heated jacket, or even a reliable forecast. You are standing in the shoes of a medieval soldier ordered to march through winter mountains, and the honest truth is you probably won't survive this. Still, thousands of people tried, and some even stumbled through to the other side. Their stories, half grit, half miracle, deserve a quiet look. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and the local time down in the comments. I love seeing how far this sleepy little campfire stretches. Now, dim the lights and step with me into the frozen pass. The air feels thinner than paper. You pull the collar of your cloak higher, though it does nothing to block the wind. The line of soldiers snakes ahead of you, each back hunched, each figure leaning into invisible fists of icy air. Somewhere, a mule brays a pitiful sound, the cry of an animal that knows its burden won't get lighter. You look down and notice the trail is littered with snapped twigs, shoe nails, and the occasional leather strap discarded by someone who couldn't afford the weight. A mainstream historical fact slips in here like frost beneath the door. Armies crossing mountain ranges in winter wasn't rare. Charlemagne marched through the Alps in 773. Hannibal long before him with elephants, and later still the armies of the Holy Roman Empire attempted the same feat. The chronicles often marvel at the bravery, but also mutter about the madness, because survival, more than the enemy, was the daily battle. As your foot sinks into snow crust, you think of a quirky tidbit that still makes you smile despite the chill. Some soldiers tucked tiny pieces of garlic or onions into their boots, convinced the smell alone kept frostbite away. Imagine the aroma wafting from a whole army of sweaty, frozen men with garlic toes. It's almost comical. And yet when you're desperate, superstition turns practical. The trail narrows. You hear the hiss of wind threading through pines, bending their shoulders until branches snap. To your right, a cliff drops into mist so thick it feels like staring into another world. The crunch of your boots echoes too loudly, so you fall in line, trying to step exactly where the man before you stepped. Historians still puzzle over whether these winter marches were calculated strategies or reckless gambles of ambition. Did commanders really weigh supply charts and risk analysis, or did pride and urgency shove them into the blizzard? The debate lingers, because the sources monastic scribes or soldier diaries tend to exaggerate. A monk might describe the snow as chest-deep, when, in truth, it only kissed the knee. But then again, knee-deep snow for a week feels like chest-deep snow anyway, doesn't it? You pause to listen. The sound of your breath is loud inside the scarf tied around your mouth. The taste of wool and old sweat clings to your tongue. Ahead, the commander lifts his hand and the line halts. You stamp your feet to keep circulation going, but each stamp sends up a puff of powder like flour from a baker's sack. The soldier next to you whispers something about saints protecting the faithful. You nod, not because you believe, but because belief is warmth, and you'll take anything. The night closes in. Torches flicker, their flames shrinking under gusts. You huddle into a cluster, shoulders brushing, body heat pooling like contraband. In the darkness you hear a mule stumble, a curse in a language you don't know, and the muffled thud of a pack rolling down a slope into nothingness. Supplies lost forever. Snowflakes sting your eyelashes. Your mind drifts. You remember summer fields, barley swaying, bees humming. Then reality slaps you back with a blast of cold air that smells faintly of pine and ash. There is no summer here, only the steady grind forward, one step at a time, through the frozen pass. The column stirs again, torches weaving like orange stars along the ridge. You follow, too tired to question, too frozen to care. But you're still here, still walking. And the mountains, ancient and unmoved, watch you in silence. The ground under you feels like iron. Every step sends a jolt up your shin, rattling bone against frozen soil. You press your heel down and hear the faint crack of frost shattering beneath leather soles. If you're lucky enough to own boots at all, they are stiff, patched with scraps of wool, maybe even stuffed with straw to keep the cold from gnawing through. Many in this line are less fortunate, trudging in worn shoes or barefoot rags, toes blackening quietly as the days stretch. You shuffle along and realize footwear is the first battlefield. It's not glamorous, no gleaming swordplay or gallant charge, but rather a slow war between flesh and frost. In chronicles of medieval campaigns, scribes describe men peeling off boots only to find toes hardened like wax candles, frostbite claiming them before any enemy spear could. That's the blunt, mainstream fact. Soldiers could lose battles before even seeing the opposing army, undone by their own frozen feet. And then there's the small, odd detail that lingers like a camp rumor. Some men smeared animal fat inside their boots, believing grease created a barrier against the cold. The smell must have been nauseating, a rancid perfume of pig lard following each step, but it may have worked, at least enough to keep a few toes attached until spring. The line of march creaks forward. Snowflakes tumble lazily at first, then sting your eyes sideways as the wind picks up. You tug at your bootlaces, tightening them, knowing a loose knot could mean a boot slipping off, swallowed instantly by the white trail. You've heard of entire shoes lost to drifts, swallowed like coins in sand, never recovered. A mule brays again, hooves scraping over a patch of frozen earth. You notice the road itself seems alive with hazards, stones hidden under snow, icy patches slick as glass. Every step is a gamble. Slip once, and the line doesn't stop for you. You imagine falling, rolling down into mist, your boots and body lost as nothing more than another rumor. Historians still debate whether medieval armies truly had standardized winter footwear or if improvisation ruled the day. Some sources insist that armies issued thicker boots lined with felt or wool, while others argue that most men simply wrapped whatever cloth they owned around their ankles. The truth is likely muddled, depending on wealth, supply chains, and sheer luck. And of course, commanders who wrote reports down often skipped over the humdrum agony of sore feet in favor of dramatic battles. You stamp the ground, listening to the hollow echo. Around you, men groan softly, muffled under scarves and hoods. The sound is rhythmic, almost like a chant. Boots striking, crunching, sliding, repeating. In the quiet moments between gusts, it becomes the march's music. Not drums, not horns, just the weary percussion of souls on frozen earth. The smell is unforgettable, wool damp with sweat, leather cracking with cold, and somewhere nearby, the faint tang of horse dung stiffened into icy lumps. It's strange how even filth feels reassuring. It means life still clings here, that the column hasn't yet been claimed entirely by silence. You try to distract yourself. Maybe you think of home, of warm floors and soft rushes beneath your feet. Maybe you wonder if this mountain path ever feels warm in summer, if green moss grows where you now stumble. But the thought vanishes as the wind slashes across your ankles. You pull your boot tighter, and the pain of circulation returning makes you gasp. The column halts suddenly. Men shuffle, mutter. Someone near the front kneels, pulling a comrade upright. His boot sole has split open, flapping like a broken tongue. The soldier tries to laugh, but his voice breaks into a cough. He ties it together with rope, each knot a prayer that it will hold for one more day. In that moment you understand boots are more than shoes. They're the thin shield between soldier and oblivion. The world may admire banners and swords, but here in the mountains, survival begins and ends with leather wrapped around toes. You stamp again, cold gnawing up your leg. Ahead, the line moves, a shuffling procession of exhausted feet. Each step is a battle, each crunch against frozen earth, a reminder that sometimes the hardest enemy is simply the ground you stand on. You lift a chunk of bread from your satchel, expecting relief, But the moment your teeth sink down, you feel the shock. It doesn't bend, doesn't soften, doesn't break apart in the forgiving way bread should. Instead, it crunches like stone. The loaf you carried since yesterday has become a weapon hard enough to bruise a knuckle, useless as food until coaxed with fire or steam. You chew anyway, risking cracked teeth, because hunger is stronger than comfort. It's not exaggeration. Chroniclers of the Crusades and Alpine campaigns alike wrote of rations turning into frozen bricks. Bread, salted meat, beans, every item meant to sustain an army stiffened into inedible lumps once temperatures plummeted. That's the mainstream fact here. Soldiers spent as much energy trying to soften their food as they did consuming it. Soaking bread in water, tucking meat close to the body for warmth, even crumbling biscuits into boiling snow, every trick mattered. And then there's a quirky little rumor preserved in some soldier letters. Men supposedly placed small loaves under their armpits as they marched, hoping body heat would soften them just enough to chew. Imagine the absurd sight, an entire line of grim warriors clutching bread to their sides like secret pets, smelling faintly of yeast and sweat. Not exactly glorious, but hunger rarely leaves room for dignity. The column moves slowly, and you keep gnawing. The bread resists, grains sharp on your tongue. You close your eyes and imagine fresh loaves from home, warm crusts steaming, the crackle of ovens. But when you open them again, you see only snow stretching ahead, and faces clenched against hunger. Historians still question whether supply officers truly anticipated the severity of mountain cold. Some argue that planners underestimated the freezing point of basic rations, thinking salted food would resist frost. Others claim commanders knew and simply gambled that men could endure. The truth probably lies in that murky space where poor logistics and blind ambition overlap. Either way, the outcome was the same. Brittle bread, shivering soldiers, morale sinking with each unchewable bite. A soldier beside you mutters curses at his ration. He smashes it with the hilt of his knife, shattering crumbs onto the snow. Some he scoops into his mouth, the rest lost to the wind. The bitterness on his face isn't just hunger, it's despair. The quiet realization that the tools of survival are turning against him. Your own stomach twists. You feel the gnawing emptiness spread like a cold fire. Somewhere ahead, smoke rises, campfires being coaxed into life by men desperate to boil snow, soften beans, make broth that at least feels edible. The smell of faint smoke is both cruel and comforting, promising warmth but reminding you of distance still to march. Your teeth ache from the effort. You tuck what remains of your loaf back into the satchel. Perhaps by nightfall, with enough body heat and patience, it will yield. Until then, you march, your belly echoing with hollow growls, your mind wandering to feasts that never existed. The crunch of snow under boots is matched now by the crunch of bread in your mouth. Both feel endless, both feel like punishment. But you keep chewing, because the alternative is worse. In this frozen pass, even food becomes stone, and you must find a way to eat it or join the silence buried beneath the snow. The wind has turned sly now, curling around your hood and slipping icy fingers down your neck. Your stomach aches with the memory of that stone-hard bread, and you find yourself staring at the simple white expanse all around. Snow is everywhere underfoot, piled on ledges, clinging to tree branches like stubborn wool. It is both curse and salvation, because when food runs out, snow is the only broth left. You crouch near a campfire where men huddle close, hands extended like wilted flowers. Someone has placed a dented pot above the flames. Inside, handfuls of snow hiss and collapse into water, steam curling upward, as if reluctant to leave. The result is a thin, tasteless soup, hardly more than melted snow with a scrap of vegetable or dried meat floating in it. Yet it's hot, and in these mountains, hot liquid is as close to hope as you'll get. That's the plain, mainstream fact. Armies on the march often relied on snowmelt for cooking and drinking. Chroniclers describe nights when water sources were frozen solid, forcing soldiers to gather snow by the armful. Fires burned low, not because wood was scarce, it often was, but because green logs smoked more than they flamed, struggling against the damp air. Meals were more ritual than nourishment, an act of convincing the body it had eaten. And here's a quirky tidbit to amuse you in the gloom. Soldiers sometimes tossed in bits of leather, shaved from old belts or saddle straps to add substance to their soup. The boiling softened the leather into something resembling noodles. Did it taste good? Likely not. But when hunger is gnawing louder than the wind, you'll chew anything that yields. The crackle of the fire is soothing, though smoke stings your eyes. The pot tilts precariously, and you watch one soldier stir with a stick, careful not to spill the precious liquid. The smell is faintly earthy, like boiled bark. You hold out your wooden cup, hands trembling from both cold and impatience, and finally sip. The liquid scalds your tongue but warms your chest. For a brief moment, the ache inside you quiets. Scholars still puzzle over how often armies carried proper cooking supplies in winter campaigns. Some argue that commanders prioritized cauldrons and pots, essential for morale and survival. Others claim soldiers improvised with helmets, shields, or even hollowed stones. Evidence is patchy, and truth may lie scattered like the embers that flicker in this camp, each glowing briefly before fading into the dark. Around you, voices murmur. Men joke weakly about the soup, calling it snow stew or white broth. A laugh ripples through the group, thin but real, proving that even mockery can taste better than despair. The sound is joined by the whinny of horses nearby, their breath fogging like smoke in the firelight. The night grows heavier. You lean closer to the fire, hands cupped around the cup, steam dampening your lashes. You realize this meager ritual of snow into soup is more than food. It is defiance. The mountains may take warmth, comfort, and sleep, but they will not take the will to eat, however thin the meal. As the flames shrink, you sip the last of your broth, licking the rim of the cup for stray drops. Tomorrow the snow will still be here. Tomorrow you'll gather more, boil more, sip again. One cup at a time, you'll coax survival from the frozen silence. You wake to the sound of fabric snapping in the wind, the canvas of tents strained like sails on a stormy sea. Cold needles your skin before you've even risen, and instinctively you tug your cloak tighter, trying to bury your chin into something resembling warmth. Yet the layers are never enough. Wool scratches against your neck, linen wraps cling damply to your chest, and still the wind slides through every seam like a thief. Medieval soldiers survived in bundles. The mainstream fact is that armies layered wool, linen, and whatever scraps of fur they could find, turning themselves into walking bundles of cloth. Cloaks served double duty as bedding at night, and mittens were rare enough that men pulled sleeves over hands instead. Monks and knights alike recorded the misery of never feeling quite dry, as snow melted against fabric only to refreeze as stiff plates of ice. Then there are the charms, odd little details tucked in between layers of cloth. A quirky tidbit comes from travelers' accounts. Men sometimes pinned bits of parchment inscribed with saintly prayers directly to their tunics, convinced divine words could shield them better than wool. Others knotted red strings around their wrists, a folk belief that the color itself kept frostbite at bay. Superstition layered alongside fabric, faith as insulation. You shift, feeling the seams of your tunic rub against frozen skin. Each layer holds its own smell, the oily tang of lanolin from sheep's wool, the faint mildew of linen worn too long without drying, the smoky perfume of last night's campfire. When men huddle together in tents, the combined scent becomes thick enough to taste a sour, human cloud that strangely reassures you of survival. Historians continue to dispute how standardized winter gear really was. Some chronicles suggest commanders issued fur-lined cloaks, boots, and gloves in bulk for major campaigns. Others argue this was more fantasy than fact, pointing out that wealthier knights may have had luxuries, but common foot soldiers relied on patched, borrowed, or stolen garments. The debate remains, stitched together like the very layers soldiers wore, uneven, full of gaps, yet holding shape somehow. As the march resumes, you notice the ritual gestures. Men tug cloaks around their throats, whisper a prayer, adjust a belt to keep fabric closer to the skin. Someone near you sneezes into the fold of his sleeve, then pulls it back over his numb fingers without hesitation. Every layer matters, every scrap is precious. The wind whips harder, snow dusts your shoulders, clinging in little pearls that melt, soak in, and instantly refreeze. You feel like a walking icicle, yet you press on, each step cushioned by the bulk of your clothing. Without it, you know you'd last minutes, maybe less. Somewhere behind you, a man mutters a prayer to Saint Martin, patron of soldiers, who once cut his cloak in half to share with a beggar. The story floats through the line like smoke, a reminder that even a ragged half-cloak is still worth saving a life. You tug your own cloak closer, fingering the edge where threads unravel. It feels fragile, insufficient, but in these mountains, faith and wool are all that stand between you and silence. The march is not just on your legs anymore, it weighs on your back, on your shoulders, on the thin rope of patience stretched inside you. You hear the scraping sound before you see it. Sledges dragging over snow and ice, pulled by animals whose breaths steam like small bonfires in the thin air. You turn your head and catch sight of them, donkeys with ears pinned back, oxen with frost clinging to their muzzles, and mules staggering under loads that look heavier than the mountains themselves. The mainstream fact here is brutally simple. Medieval armies depended on pack animals and crude sledges to haul supplies when wheels were useless. Mountain passes made wagons near impossible, so armies lashed gear onto wooden runners and urged beasts forward through drifts. Without them, there would be no bread, no arrows, no firewood, no hope of continuing. Entire campaigns lived or died by the stubborn endurance of creatures that had never volunteered for war. You watch one mule strain against its harness, hooves slipping as it drags a wooden sledge piled with sacks. The noise is terrible, the groan of ropes, the squeal of wood scraping ice, the guttural protest of the animal. Soldiers shove from behind, grunting in rhythm, their breaths forming little clouds that vanish instantly. The scene is slow, almost endless. Push, slip, curse, push again. And yet, amid the hardship, odd little stories surface. A quirky tidbit whispers through chronicles. Soldiers sometimes whispered charms into the ears of their beasts, convinced that kind words or holy phrases would give them strength. Others, less gentle, swore that singing bawdy songs in the animals' presence made them walk faster, as if the laughter of men infected the mules with stubborn cheer. You can almost imagine the absurdity, an army crawling up a mountain while soldiers belt out crude verses, trying to coax a donkey forward through snow. The slope steepens. Men knot ropes to the sledges, hauling alongside the animals, their boots scraping against ice. You catch the acrid scent of sweat mixing with the cold, sharp, almost metallic. A strap snaps, and the load tumbles sideways, spilling grain onto the snow. The kernels scatter like golden stars against the white. Men dive to scoop them up, ignoring the frost biting their bare fingers, because every handful counts. You see one soldier lick his palm to collect stray grains, greedily sucking them down before they're lost. The road narrows, and panic flickers in the group. The path hugs a cliff, barely wide enough for man and mule together. One misstep, and the load and perhaps the animal will plunge into the abyss below. You hear men shouting, ropes creaking as they hold the sledge steady. The mule freezes, eyes wide, nostrils flaring. Its terror is contagious. You feel your own chest tighten, your feet rooted, as though you too might be dragged over the edge. Historians still wrestle with whether commanders truly calculated the risk of dragging supplies this way, or whether desperation dictated every choice. Some argue that leaders planned carefully, mapping routes and staging depots in advance. Others suggest they simply gambled, trusting that enough animals would survive to carry what was needed. Sources are contradictory. Monks writing from monasteries far away could hardly know the daily struggle on these passes. Perhaps the truth lies in between. a plan on parchment, shattered daily by wind and snow. The mule finally lurches forward, steadied by soldiers pulling on ropes like a human team of reins. The sledge groans past the narrowest point, and a sigh of relief ripples through the line. You breathe again, unaware you had been holding your breath. For a moment, you think about how many lives depend on each stubborn hoof, each creaking board of wood. The sun, weak and pale, breaks through the clouds, lighting the scene with a ghostly glow. You see steam rising off the animals' backs, their coats frosted white, their eyes dull but still moving forward. You wonder how many will collapse tonight. Some will be eaten, you know that grim fact from countless campaigns. Desperate soldiers butcher their beasts when supplies run out, trading transport for meat. The bones are left in the snow, mute witnesses to hunger's rule. But for now, the column pushes on. The soundscape is relentless. Hooves striking ice, sledges screeching, men grunting, ropes creaking, curses flying. You smell dung, sharp and acrid, oddly reassuring in the sterile cold. It means life still clings, however miserably, to this frozen passage. The trail levels briefly, and a strange quiet falls. Men slump against their sledges, patting their animals as if they were comrades. One soldier pulls a carrot from his pocket, perhaps stolen, perhaps saved, and offers it to a mule. The animal's lips tremble, teeth crunching down gratefully. You watch this tiny moment of kindness, an oasis in a desert of hardship. And you realize something. Survival here isn't just about men enduring. It's about animals too, unwilling conscripts in a war they never chose. Their stubborn hearts, their steady hooves, their endless pulling make the march possible. Without them, the army is nothing but starving men with empty hands. You adjust the strap of your own pack, suddenly feeling its weight more keenly. Your boots crunch forward, falling in rhythm with the mule beside you. Together, man and beast, you trudge through the snow, tied not just by ropes but by the shared necessity of moving forward, step after frozen step. The mountains loom higher still, and the sledges drag behind like anchors. You wonder how many more ridges lie ahead, how many more animals will stumble before the army emerges. But for now, the column moves, and that is all that matters. The mountain offers a trick of mercy in winter. Sometimes rivers, swollen and untamable in summer, freeze into hard, glittering roads. You find yourself standing before one now, the surface slick as glass, stretching into the distance like a mirror laid across the land. The army hesitates on the bank, each man staring at the sheet of ice, and wondering whether it will carry the weight of thousands, or whether it will crack open into black, rushing death. Accounts from the period describe these crossings with a mixture of awe and dread. Chronicles of Alpine campaigns tell us that entire columns marched across frozen rivers when bridges had collapsed or never existed. To walk upon ice was both salvation and gamble. No wagons stuck in mud, no swollen waters sweeping men away, but instead a treacherous expanse that groaned under every step. And here comes one of those odd flourishes that stick in memory. Soldiers sometimes spread hay or straw over the ice, believing it would grip better beneath their boots and sledges. Imagine the absurdity. An army carpeting a river like a banquet hall, shuffling across a golden path that crackled and slid underfoot. Horses were blindfolded to keep them calm, their ears flicking nervously as hooves clattered against the frozen surface. You shuffle forward in the line, breath clouding the air, ears filled with the strange music of ice. It creaks, pops, and moans like a living creature beneath you. Every sound makes your heart lurch. You fix your eyes on the soldier ahead, copying his movements exactly, unwilling to tempt fate with a stray step. The ice glimmers in patches where snow has blown away, showing depths so dark they seem bottomless. Modern historians are far from united on how safe these crossings really were. Some argue that commanders timed them carefully, choosing nights when the temperature had been brutally low for weeks, ensuring the surface could bear the load. Others suggest it was mostly blind luck, that desperation pushed men onto rivers, regardless of thickness. and prayers mattered more than measurements. The records don't give certainty, only fragments of description and the occasional tragic note of men lost to cracking ice. A cart lurches onto the river, its wheels wrapped in rawhide strips for grip. The sledge runners screech, sparks flying where metal kisses frozen stone at the shore. Once on the ice, the entire load glides too easily, skidding sideways as men scramble with ropes to keep it aligned. The mule pulling it stumbles, hooves sliding, eyes wide with fear. A soldier runs forward, whispering to it as though calming a child, guiding each step. The animal shivers violently, but somehow it keeps moving. Your own boots slip, sending a jolt up your leg. You throw out your arms, balance restored at the last second. The taste of fear fills your mouth, metallic, sharp, as if you've bitten your tongue. Around you the silence is heavy, broken only by those eerie creaks underfoot. Even the wind seems to hush, unwilling to disturb the gamble. Halfway across, you glance up and see the line stretching endlessly ahead and behind. Tiny figures move in solemn procession, each step a test of trust in the frozen surface. Torches flicker at the banks, their glow blurred by mist, as if the world itself is holding its breath. And then, suddenly, the sound of cracking, a sharp report like a musket shot, echoing across the valley. Men freeze, animals bray, ropes jerk taut. For a heartbeat you feel the ice sag beneath you. Panic claws at your chest. But the break is small, off to the side, a warning rather than a verdict. The column moves again, slower now, each man lighter on his feet, each prayer whispered more fervently. At last, the far bank rises before you. Men stumble onto soil, some kissing the ground, others collapsing with exhaustion. You follow, boots thudding onto frozen earth, your legs trembling from more than cold. Behind you, the river gleams in the moonlight, a silver scar through the mountains. It has spared you this time, though you know others weren't so lucky. You glance back once more, the sound of creaking still ringing in your ears. It feels less like you crossed a river, and more like you walked across the back of some ancient beast, holding its breath beneath the ice. You rise before dawn, when the world is hushed and white, and realize the silence is not empty at all, it is crowded with smoke. Thin trails drift upward from dozens of campfires, weaving into the sky like ghostly banners. You can taste the soot before you smell it, acrid and dry in your throat. The army has survived another night, and those little columns of smoke are the proof. Chroniclers often remarked on this nightly ritual. Fires meant warmth, food, and a chance for the body to unclench from the cold. Soldiers gathered in circles, their faces lit orange against the snow, the rest of the world a dark blur. For an army crossing mountains, these pockets of firelight were more than comfort. They were survival itself. Without heat, fingers stiffened, lungs froze, and sleep became fatal. And then there are the stranger notes preserved in letters and tales. One curious practice mentioned is that soldiers sometimes place stones directly into the fire, then wrap them in cloth to use as bed warmers. Others swore by sleeping as close to the embers as possible, though it meant waking with singed cloaks and coughing from smoke. Imagine dozing off, nose filled with the smell of charred wool, yet grateful because at least you could feel your toes. You shuffle closer to one of the fires. The flames crackle hungrily, sparks flying into the dark like tiny meteors. The wood smokes more than it burns. Green branches snapped from the sparse trees above the tree line. The smoke stings your eyes, and you blink, feeling tears freeze on your lashes. Around you, men are half asleep, heads nodding, hands extended stiffly toward the glow. The sound is subdued, fire popping, quiet breathing, the faint rustle of cloth as someone shifts for warmth. Scholarly opinion remains divided on how armies managed firewood supplies in regions stripped bare by snow. Some argue that commanders planned collection parties, sending men ahead to gather fuel. Others think most armies simply burned whatever they found, even tearing down wooden shrines or village fences. The evidence is thin, but every account agrees on one thing: without fire, Morale collapsed faster than the temperature. You cup your hands and feel the warmth seep into your bones, a creeping relief that almost makes you sigh. Your cloak smells of smoke now, the scent seeping into fabric until it becomes part of you. It will linger long after the march is over, a reminder of nights when smoke was as precious as bread. Nearby, a group begins to hum softly. Not a song exactly, but a low drone, the kind that matches the rhythm of flames. It's not for entertainment, it's for endurance. The sound keeps eyelids from drooping too far, keeps men from slipping into sleep that might never end. The hum and the fire together weave a fragile barrier against the mountain's silence. Then, suddenly, the wind shifts. Smoke billows into your face, choking, burning your eyes and throat. You cough, doubling over, the world a blur of white and grey. For a moment, it feels like drowning on dry land. The man beside you laughs hoarsely, muttering that the smoke has chosen you as its victim tonight. Even here, humour creeps in like another kind of warmth, stubborn and human. When dawn finally lifts, the smoke lingers as a veil across the valley. It curls above the camp, marking the army's passage for miles around. Enemy scouts could see it, no doubt, but the risk is accepted. Better to live another day in the warmth of fire than freeze invisibly in the dark. As the camp stirs and the fires are stamped out, you inhale one last lungful of smoke. It clings to you, harsh but oddly comforting. The memory of this night will remain not in sights or sounds, but in smell, the bitter perfume of wood, wool, and survival. The road winds uphill again, and exhaustion spreads through the column like a slow disease. Faces are pale, lips cracked, bodies stooped beneath cloaks, stiff with frost. Then, almost without cue, the sound begins low at first, a murmur on the wind, then swelling into rhythm. Soldiers are singing. Writers of the time often recorded this habit. Armies marching through difficult terrain kept cadence with chants or songs. It was not about melody, not about beauty, but about survival. The rhythm gave tired feet a reason to keep lifting, one step and then the next. Words repeated endlessly could drown out hunger, cold, even fear. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of blasting music at the gym. Except here the gym is a snow-covered cliff, and missing a step could mean death. There's also the peculiar twist of human creativity under duress. Some accounts mention verses improvised on the march, where men mocked their commanders or joked about the absurdity of freezing in someone else's war. Imagine trudging through the snow while bellowing a parody of a church hymn, swapping sacred lines for crude humor that made the whole file laugh. That odd, half-rebellious chorus may have been the only spark of rebellion safe enough to voice. The sound builds around you now, echoing between ridges. The snow muffles most noises, but singing rises above it, bouncing strangely in the still air. You can hear the scrape of boots keeping time, the clatter of a pot dangling from someone's pack striking in rhythm. The tune is uneven, sometimes breaking into coughs, but it holds. For a few minutes you forget your toes are numb, because the sound lifts you. Scholars are not entirely in agreement about whether commanders encouraged this practice or tolerated it reluctantly. Some argue that singing was considered essential for keeping order lines moving together, men united in breath and beat. Others suspect that officers disapproved of the irreverent lyrics but turned a blind eye, knowing silence was more dangerous than mockery. The truth is blurred, as usual, between regulation and reality. Your own voice joins in almost without thought. The words are simple, a repeated phrase about reaching the valley, about warmth and wine waiting somewhere ahead. The melody is flat, but it feels good to give breath shape instead of just clouds of vapor. Around you, the volume swells until the whole column sounds like a single beast roaring against the cold. And then comes the strangest part. You realize the singing is not just for you. Animals perk their ears at the noise, moving more steadily as if reassured by the human chorus. Even the mountains seem to respond. The rhythm pushes the silence back, filling the empty air with something living. You notice a grin split the face of the soldier beside you. His teeth are yellow, his cheeks cracked by wind, yet the smile looks real. He stamps his boots in time, swinging his arms wide, daring the snow to weigh him down. For a brief stretch of road, laughter threads into the chant, and the column almost feels like a parade rather than a death march. The path twists again, and the song falters. Breath shortens, verses dissolve into gasps, but the echo lingers, floating back down the valley like a memory. You realize the music has done its work. Men have walked another mile without noticing the ache. Tomorrow, the singing may rise again. Different words, maybe darker jokes, maybe holier tones. But tonight, you carry in your ears the echo of stubborn voices defying the cold. The snow crunches again into silence, but inside your chest, the rhythm continues, each step still keeping time with the invisible drumbeat of survival. You expect a mug of ale to taste like comfort, like fire sliding down your throat, steadying your courage. But here, in the mountains, even liquid hope betrays you. The casks freeze, the froth stiffens into slush, and what pours into your cup is no longer a drink, but a half-frozen lump, closer to porridge than beer. Medieval records leave no doubt that alcohol travelled with armies. It was safer than water and carried calories along with morale. Beer and ale for common soldiers, wine for the officers and wealthier knights, sometimes mead if luck and supplies allowed. In warmer climes, the cask was a companion. In alpine passes, however, the cold turned it into mockery. Men hammered at barrels with axes trying to break through ice, scooping out handfuls of slush to thaw against their tongues. And there are the small eccentric details that stick. Some soldiers wrote about heating ale by plunging hot stones into their mugs. The result, apparently, was a bubbling, smoky brew that smelled halfway between bread and burnt wood. Imagine huddling by a campfire, sipping what tasted like liquid chimney, but grateful anyway because it went down warm. You cradle your own cup now, shaking it gently. Inside, the ale is thick, like syrup half set. You tip it back, and the cold shock against your teeth makes you wince. The taste is faint, dulled by freezing, but the memory of it is enough. Around you, men lift their cups too, toasting half-heartedly. The clink is muffled, more wood on wood than bright metal, but the gesture matters. The question of just how much armies relied on alcohol is still unsettled among scholars. Some argue that drink was essential, issued daily in measured rations, a lifeline for both morale and health. Others counter that supplies were too inconsistent, that soldiers often went without, relying instead on melted snow or thin broths. The truth likely varied by campaign, by wealth, by chance. Sometimes barrels rolled along faithfully, other times they froze solid or tumbled into ravines, leaving only dry mouths and longing. You glance at the men beside you, their cheeks pinked not by warmth but by drink. For a brief spell, laughter drifts upward, softer than the snowflakes falling on cloaks. One man tells a joke about a bishop slipping on ice. Another sings a line from a tavern song, his voice slurred but defiant. For a moment, the column feels less like a march and more like a tavern with white walls and a ceiling of storm clouds. But the reprieve is short. The wind cuts in, rattling the laughter away. Your ale turns to slush again before the cup is half empty. You swallow what remains, teeth aching from the cold. The taste lingers, bitter and flat, but so does the comfort, the faint reminder of hearths and feasts, of lives far from this mountain road. The fire dwindles, men curl under cloaks, and the casks sit stiff with frost. You know tomorrow they will be heavier, harder to pry open, but still carried along. Because even frozen, ale is hope in a barrel, and hope is not something you abandon on the side of a mountain. The night grows darker. You lay back, cup still in hand, the faint taste of slush on your tongue. Around you the silence returns, broken only by the sound of breath and the occasional, sleepy chuckle. For tonight, ale half frozen, half liquid has done its work. The snow is falling harder now, thick curtains that swallow distance and blur the line between sky and earth. You march with your head bent low, eyes squinting, when suddenly a sound cuts through the storm, a deep, resonant blast that vibrates in your chest more than your ears, a horn. Medieval armies relied on sound as their lifeline in weather like this. Contemporary descriptions speak of trumpets, horns, even drums used as signals when sight was useless. In blizzards, where banners vanished into white fog and shouting carried only a few feet before being eaten by the wind, the long, mournful note of a horn was often the only command soldiers could follow. It meant move forward, regroup, or brace for trouble. Without it, men scattered and froze alone in the snow. And then there's the curious image left by one account of a Swiss campaign. Some horns were so crudely carved from ox horn or wood that they froze to the lips of the players. Imagine a soldier yanking the instrument away only to rip skin from his mouth, blood freezing instantly, and still being expected to blow again at the commander's signal. A grim joke among the ranks was that a hornblower left pieces of himself behind with every call. The storm swallows nearly everything else. Your boots crunch, your breath rasps, but all around you is a wall of white silence. The horn sounds again, closer now, and men shuffle toward it instinctively like moths drawn to flame. You raise your head, scanning for a banner, but nothing moves above the snow. Only the note guides you, hollow and commanding, telling you where the column bends. Scholars remain divided about how effective these sound signals really were in mountain storms. Some argue they were indispensable, noting repeated mentions in chronicles of horns rallying men in chaos. Others suggest that the sound often confused more than helped, echoing strangely against cliffs so that soldiers marched the wrong way. The evidence leaves no certainty, just glimpses of confusion described in the shaky ink of exhausted scribes. The blast comes once more, this time long and low. You feel it vibrate in your chest, steadying your steps. The man beside you cups his hand around his ear, straining to catch its direction. Another mutters a prayer to Saint Cecilia, patroness of music, as if even divine harmony might steer him straight. You imagine the hornblower himself, hunched against the gale, cheeks puffed raw, fingers frozen to the wood. Each note must feel like lifting a mountain, but without him the army would scatter like snowflakes on the wind. And then, faint but real, you hear a second sound, a replying horn somewhere ahead, echoing through the pass. A call and response, weaving a line of sound through the storm, binding the army together by invisible threads of breath. The march continues. You follow the sound, step after step, until your legs ache and your ears ring. The horn is not music, not beauty, but in this endless white silence, it is the closest thing to life's heartbeat. And tonight, that is enough. The storm eases, but a new menace creeps in with the dawn. The glare. The world has turned blinding white, every surface reflecting the pale sun until it feels as though knives of light are stabbing your eyes. You blink hard, tears freezing on your lashes, and realize that you can't keep them open for long without pain. Snow blindness, an invisible enemy that strikes without weapon or roar. Records from the time emphasize this danger. Chroniclers noted that soldiers complained of aching eyes, blurred vision, and sometimes complete temporary blindness after days of marching across bright snowfields. It wasn't permanent for most, but in a winter campaign, even losing sight for hours could mean stumbling off a cliff or being left behind. Commanders dreaded this affliction as much as frostbite, because an army without eyes is an army that cannot march. And then there's the strange ingenuity men carried with them. One unusual trick appears in a few scattered accounts, rubbing charcoal or soot around the eyes to dull the glare. It must have looked bizarre. Lines of weary soldiers with black streaks smeared across their faces like war paint, not for battle but simply to keep walking without going blind. Others are said to have cut narrow slits into strips of leather, the crude ancestors of snow goggles, reducing light to manageable slivers. You reach up now and smear a thumb against the side of the campfire pit, lifting a streak of soot to rub along your cheekbones. The grit scratches against your skin, but the relief is instant. You can open your eyes wider, the world no longer a blinding wall of light. Around you, others do the same, faces turning into smudged masks that make the column look more like a troop of shadows than an army. Modern researchers disagree on how widespread these protective measures really were. Some argue they were common folk remedies, passed along by local guides or shepherds who knew the mountains. Others believe they were rare improvisations, not mentioned often because most soldiers simply suffered without remedy. The truth remains uncertain, hidden like footprints erased by fresh snow. The march continues, but at least now you can see. The ice sparkles less cruelly, the path ahead takes clearer shape. You notice details you had missed before. The jagged cracks in the frozen earth, the faint blue shimmer of distant glaciers, the shadow of ravens circling overhead. Even in hardship, the world has moments of fragile beauty, glimpsed only once the pain is eased. A soldier beside you jokes weakly that with soot-smeared eyes, you all look like demons marching out of the mountain. Another replies that demons would be warmer. Laughter ripples briefly, blackened faces grinning in the glare. For a few heartbeats, the misery softens into something lighter. Still, the sun climbs higher, and the brightness does not relent. You squint through your soot-streaked mask, boots crunching forward, grateful for this small trick of survival. Without it, the mountain would blind you. With it, you can at least keep moving, eyes open to the endless white road ahead. The valley sleeps under its blanket of snow, but the silence is fragile. You march with the column, boots squeaking against hard-packed drifts, when the ground trembles beneath your feet. At first it feels like nothing more than your own exhaustion, a misstep, a heartbeat skipping, but then the mountain itself groans. A deep, rolling sound swells through the air, and instinctively every soldier freezes. The air tastes suddenly sharp, filled with the metallic tang of panic. You look upward. The slope above, heavy with snow, is shifting. Avalanches were the nightmare no commander could control. Period accounts leave us haunting glimpses of entire detachments swallowed by a single roar of snow. Not enemy arrows, not starvation, just the mountain, shaking loose its burden and burying men as if erasing ink from a page. Armies feared avalanches as much as they feared ambushes, because neither warning nor skill could guarantee survival. One moment you march, the next you are gone, smothered in silence. And then there are the strange little stories soldiers passed along. Some believed whistling could trigger a slide, so men kept their lips sealed tight, even when nerves begged for a tune. Others carried tiny bells, not to ring but to silence, the superstitious notion being that hanging a bell hushed the mountain's wrath, as though snow could be soothed like an angry spirit. Imagine an army trudging forward with bells tucked inside cloaks, a charm against nature's temper. Odd, but when your life depends on superstition, even absurd rituals feel rational. The crack above deepens, a tearing sound like cloth ripped apart by unseen hands. Then it begins. Snow loosens, sliding first as a whisper, then a rush, then a wall. White fury crashes down the slope, devouring trees and boulders in its path. You feel the ground shake, the air whipped into a frenzy, the roar so loud it drowns out your own pulse. Men scatter instinctively, diving for the scant shelter of rocks, pressing themselves flat against the frozen ground as though that alone could save them. Historians continue to argue over just how often avalanches struck medieval armies. Some chronicles describe them vividly, insisting entire campaigns were broken by single disasters. Others are silent on the subject, leading modern readers to wonder whether scribes exaggerated or perhaps omitted the stories to preserve reputations. The sources are fragmentary, inconsistent, leaving us with questions rather than certainty. Did avalanches destroy whole regiments, or were they rare tragedies magnified by rumor? We may never know. You hurl yourself behind a jagged boulder, snow biting your cheek. The roar swells, then crashes past, a river of white flowing where moments ago there had been stillness. The wind of it alone slams into you, knocking the breath from your chest. When at last it fades, the silence returns in a way more terrifying than the noise. You lift your head, ears ringing. The slope where the column had been marching is now blank, smooth, white, erased. Shouts ripple through the survivors. Men claw at the snow with bare hands, digging, screaming names swallowed by the mountain. Fingers bleed, nails crack, but the snow is merciless, hard as stone beneath the surface. Occasionally a scrap of cloak appears, a frozen arm, a twisted sledge. Some men are pulled out alive, gasping and half-blind, while others are never found. The cold reclaims them faster than comrades can dig. You sit back on your heels, panting, staring at the unbroken white that has become a graveyard. The air smells of pine splintered by the slide, sharp and raw. Your body trembles, not just from cold but from the knowledge that nothing, not skill, not courage, not faith can shield you from the whim of an avalanche. The mountain decides, and men obey. Yet the march must continue. The commander raises his arm, voice hoarse, ordering the column forward along a safer ridge. Soldiers glance back once, twice, then trudge on, leaving behind the buried. You feel guilt like a stone in your gut, but also the strange numbness that survival demands. To stop is to freeze, and so you walk, step after step, while the snow conceals its dead in silence. That night, the camp is quieter than usual. Fires burn low, men huddle wordless, each staring into flames as if seeing faces reflected there. The smell of smoke is thicker, clinging to cloaks and hair, but even that comfort cannot erase the memory of the roar. Somewhere in the distance, another avalanche rumbles, faint but real. Heads lift, shoulders tense, then sag again. The mountain reminds you it is still listening. And yet, even here, small rituals persist. A soldier near you mutters a charm under his breath, pressing a talisman of bone between his palms. Another ties a scrap of red cloth to a branch, planting it in the snow like a flag against disaster. You realize the avalanche has not just stolen lives, it has carved superstition deeper into every survivor. The next morning, when the column resumes, the path is eerily smooth. Where men died, the snow gleams unbroken, as if mocking memory. You place your boots carefully, every step a whispered plea that the ground will hold. Above, the peaks loom, silent and indifferent, their white shoulders heavy with unfallen loads. You understand now why medieval soldiers saw mountains as places of spirits, of divine judgment, of wrath cloaked in white. Your breath clouds before you, mingling with the mist curling from the slopes. Somewhere behind, buried beneath yards of snow, lie comrades, mules, and supplies swallowed whole. Ahead, the path stretches on, uncertain, perilous. You march because there is no choice. The mountain keeps its tithe, and the living keep moving. The march resumes in grim silence, boots scuffing over fresh snow that hides yesterday's horror. But soon you notice something chilling, not in the wind, but in what lies at the side of the path. A shape half buried, dark against the white. You look closer and realize it's a body frozen stiff, arms curled as if still clutching a weapon. His face is pale stone, mouth open in a scream that will never finish. He has become a marker, a warning for all who come after. Accounts from the era don't spare such details. Monastic chronicles, travel diaries, even letters sent home mention how mountain passes were lined with the dead. Soldiers left behind became landmarks, grim reminders of the cost of moving forward. Guides pointed to corpses as mileposts. Turn after the man in the red cloak. The frozen horse marks the safer slope. It sounds grotesque, but in the endless sameness of snow, a body could mean the difference between losing the trail and reaching shelter. And then there are the stranger customs whispered between soldiers. Some believed that to step directly over a frozen corpse would curse your feet with frostbite, so men detoured awkwardly around them, bowing slightly as if in apology. Others placed small tokens, bits of bread, a button, a prayer bead upon the chest of the fallen, an improvised offering to keep the mountain appeased. Imagine an army weaving through a graveyard of their own comrades, turning each frozen body into both road sign and shrine. The smell reaches you slowly, faint but sharp. Not rot, for the cold preserves too well, but something metallic, a tang of iron lingering in the air. It mingles with the smoke of nearby fires, an uneasy perfume that sticks in your nostrils. You pull your cloak tighter, as if fabric could block the scent, though it lives in memory more than air. Modern researchers remain divided on how intentional these body markers really were. Some suggest armies deliberately left the dead where they fell, knowing others would follow and need the guidance. Others argue that it was necessity, not strategy. Men simply lacked the strength to bury their dead in frozen ground. Either way, the frozen became part of the path itself, silent companions of those still breathing. You keep walking, but the images are everywhere now. A mule stiff on its side, harness still strapped, a hand sticking up from a drift like a root clawing for the sky, a helmet, rim frosted white, sitting atop a skull whose grin mocks the living. Each sight chips away at you, until numbness is all you have left to offer. The column slows at a particularly narrow ledge. Snow has fallen heavily here, obscuring the trail. The guide hesitates, scanning the slope, then points to a dark lump, half exposed near a rock. It is another corpse, this one kneeling as if in prayer, frozen in place. The guide gestures to it confidently. This is the correct way. Without that marker, you realize the path would be guesswork, perhaps death. Even in silence, the dead are leading you onward. At night, by the fire, men whisper about what they've seen. One insists he saw a frozen face smile as they passed, a trick of light but enough to send a shiver down the line. Another swears the bodies are fewer when you look back, as though the mountain collects them when unobserved. Jokes arise, thin and bitter, that at least the dead never complain of rations or blisters. But laughter dies quickly, smothered by the thought that tomorrow you might be one of those roadside statues. Sleep is uneasy. When you close your eyes, you see the pale shapes again, their outlines glowing in the darkness of memory. You dream of walking through an endless corridor of frozen figures, each one turning its head slowly to watch you pass. You wake with a start, the fire low, the night silent. For a moment you're unsure whether you dreamed at all. Dawn comes, pale and pitiless. You trudge on, following the line, and realize that the mountain keeps its own record of the march. Not on parchment, not in ink, but in frozen flesh. Long after songs fade and banners rot, the bodies will remain, locked in ice until spring or perhaps forever. They are both memory and warning, carved into the path itself. You keep your eyes forward now, unwilling to linger on the shapes at the edge of vision, yet you know they are there, lining the road like silent sentinels. Each step crunches closer to the possibility that one day you too might stand frozen in eternal watch, guiding others through the past long after your voice has faded. The mountain seems empty, but you soon realize you are not alone. Ahead, a figure emerges from the mist, wrapped in a rough wool cloak, leaning on a shepherd's staff. He looks like any villager trudging home, but the soldiers stiffen, hands tightening on weapons. In terrain like this, strangers are never just strangers. They are guides, spies, or threats, and sometimes all three at once. Documents from medieval campaigns make frequent mention of locals encountered in high passes. Sometimes they offered help, leading armies through safe trails in exchange for coin or food. Other times they misled entire columns, steering soldiers into ambushes or dead ends. These encounters were a gamble every bit as dangerous as avalanches or frostbite. You relied on someone who knew the mountains better than you, yet you could never be sure which banner his loyalty served. And then there are the little eccentricities preserved in side notes of chronicles. One tale describes spies disguising themselves as harmless shepherds, driving small flocks of goats ahead to appear innocent. Another tells of a woman who sold warm milk to freezing soldiers, then disappeared the next day. Rumors swirled that she had delivered information to the enemy along with her dairy. Picture it. Hardened men clutching mugs of milk, unknowingly funding their own downfall. You step closer now, studying the man in the snow. His beard is frosted, his eyes sharp despite the weather. He mutters in a dialect you barely understand, pointing toward a ridge. Is it safety or a trap? You glance at the commander, who weighs the choice quickly. The column cannot wander blind, so the order is given to follow. Boots crunch into a new path, trust and fear braided together like rope. The smell of the stranger lingers as you walk behind him, sheep, smoke, and unwashed wool, strangely comforting in the sterile cold. He moves with ease, stepping where the snow is shallowest, tapping his staff against hidden rocks. Men copy his every move, grateful yet wary. No one speaks too loudly, as if afraid he might overhear a thought. Modern historians remain divided on how often locals truly acted as guides versus deceivers. Some argue that practical survival made loyalty fluid villagers, aided whoever paid best. Others insist that communities leaned strongly toward defending their own territory, exploiting foreign armies with misinformation. The truth likely varied valley by valley, day by day, with survival shaping allegiance more than politics. Hours pass, and the guide halts at a fork between two slopes. He gestures one way, mutters a word, then vanishes into the mist without waiting for thanks. The army is left staring at his footprints until the wind erases them. Suspicion prickles. Was he saving you, or abandoning you to fate? Only the next mile will tell. The path grows narrower, cliffs yawning to your side. You can feel the fear ripple down the line, men glancing back at the space where the stranger vanished. Some mutter curses, others whisper prayers. You realize how fragile trust becomes when your life depends on a man you met only minutes ago. At camp that night, stories spread like sparks. One soldier swears the guide's cloak bore the colors of the enemy. Another insists he saw a silver coin change hands between him and the commander. The truth twists in the retelling, until no one is sure whether they were saved or betrayed. You lie awake, staring at the smoke curling through the tent flap. The faces of shepherds, milk sellers, and shadowy locals flicker in your mind. They are ghosts of the past, appearing and vanishing, always holding your life in their hands. You wonder how many armies before yours walked into traps this way, and how many slipped through safely by trusting the right stranger. The wind rattles the canvas, and you close your eyes, uneasy. Tomorrow you will walk again, not knowing whether the next cloaked figure on the path is salvation, deception, or both at once. Morning comes, brittle and grey, and the column stirs with a sluggish reluctance. Men cough into their cloaks, boots creak against stiff snow, and somewhere in the mist a priest clears his throat. You know what's coming because you've heard it every day since the march began, the slow unfurling of relics and banners. Chroniclers from the age record this ritual with almost as much reverence as they do battles. Before trudging into the white unknown, soldiers gathered behind symbols of faith, splinters of the true cross, bones of obscure saints, or banners stitched with holy images. These objects were not merely decoration, they were shields for the soul, assurances that divine favor accompanied the army step for step. Without them, morale withered as quickly as toes in frost. And yet, woven among these solemn moments are stranger details. One source tells of a bishop carrying a reliquary so heavy it required 2 men to drag it on a sledge, slowing the column but never abandoned. Another rumor insists that soldiers sometimes wore amulets fashioned from ground-up saints' bones mixed into wax, convinced it would warm their blood. Imagine shuffling up an icy slope, knees buckling, yet refusing to drop a box of finger bones because you believe it keeps death away. The priest lifts a hand, and the column halts. A small altar is improvised from a flat rock. The reliquary is placed atop it, a gleaming box studded with gems that catch what little light filters through the storm. The smell of incense, sharp and resinous, fights against the odor of sweat and damp wool. Soldiers bow their heads, some muttering prayers, others simply closing their eyes to rest. Modern scholarship cannot quite agree on the role these relics truly played. Some historians argue they were central to discipline, binding men to a higher cause when rations and pay failed. Others suggest they were more symbolic, cherished by a few, but largely ignored by weary soldiers. The evidence is scattered, sometimes glowing descriptions of miracles, other times silence as if the relics were mere baggage. What is certain is that commanders carried them, convinced or not, because abandoning them risked mutiny as much as blasphemy. The chanting begins. Low voices ripple down the line, blending with the hiss of falling snow. Latin words you barely understand echo in your ears, their rhythm steadying your breath. For a moment, the biting cold loosens its grip. You feel wrapped not just in wool but in invisible layers of belief, fragile but warming. When the ritual ends, the banners are raised. Painted saints flutter stiffly in the wind, their faces serene despite the storm. Soldiers straighten, shoulders squaring under the gaze of holy figures. You sense the change immediately. The column moves again, faster, steadier, as if the relics themselves have given strength. But faith cuts both ways. Later, by the fire, you hear whispers that today's avalanche was punishment for doubters. Others claim the relic gleamed brighter, proof that salvation is near. Belief shapes memory, turning the day's suffering into narrative. The mountain is no longer just snow and stone. It is a theatre where saints and sinners wrestle in silence. The night grows heavy. In the camp, relics are placed in the center, guarded carefully. Men sleep in circles around them, as if the objects radiate warmth through the darkness. You notice one soldier pressing his lips to the reliquary before lying down, eyes closed in exhausted trust. Another keeps a tiny wooden cross tied to his wrist, clutching it even in sleep. You lie back, smoke curling above, and stare at the blurred outline of the relic box glowing faintly in firelight. Is it protection, or simply weight? Does it shield the army, or drag it down? You cannot say. But you know this. Men need something to believe in when the mountain seems determined to bury them. Whether it is cloth, bone, or whispered chant, faith is the one fire that cannot freeze. And so the relics march with you, silent but ever present, their jeweled eyes watching as you take another step into the white. The march drags on, and with every breath you draw, the air feels sharper, slicing your throat raw. Men cough around you, their voices hoarse, some spitting flecks of red into the snow. The cold has settled inside their lungs like an unwelcome tenant, refusing to leave. It isn't the sword or arrow that strikes first here, it's the slow ache of illness, the creeping fever that burns beneath layers of ice. Accounts from medieval armies mention this constant battle against sickness. Frost cracked lips until they bled, damp wool invited sores, and lungs rattled with coughs that turned fatal in the thin air. Supplies ran thin, and the cold turned even mild ailments into serious threats. Commanders may have spoken of enemy walls and glory, but soldiers remembered the winter for what it really was, a campaign against their own bodies. And then you stumble across a peculiar note, tucked into the writings of a friar who accompanied one alpine march. He described men chewing bitter roots they dug from the frozen earth angelica, he claimed. A plant locals swore could ease coughing and warm the blood. Others gnawed strips of pine bark, believing the resin carried strength from the trees themselves. Imagine rows of warriors, faces blackened with soot to guard their eyes, crouched over snow like children hunting weeds, stuffing fibrous roots into their mouths because they had nothing else left to try. You kneel in the snow yourself, fingers numb as you scrape at the soil beneath a rock. The root you tug free is stringy, smelling faintly of pepper and earth. You bite down, and bitterness floods your tongue, so sharp it makes your eyes water. But warmth follows, real or imagined, and you keep chewing. Around you, others do the same, desperate to believe that nature has hidden medicine here in the frost. Scholars today debate just how effective these remedies might have been. Some suggest angelica and pine resin genuinely offered nutrients or mild antiseptic qualities. Others dismiss them as folklore, arguing the plants did little but distract men from their misery. The evidence is scattered in half-believed anecdotes, leaving modern minds to guess whether roots really saved lives or merely gave hope where hope was thin. The column trudges on, each man coughing, chewing, whispering prayers. The smell of roots mixes with smoke when they are boiled into thin stews at night, turning the camp into a strange apothecary. The flavor is harsh, almost medicinal, but men slurp it down gratefully, warming their hands around cups as if clutching treasure. You notice the small rituals that bloom in this grim setting. One soldier always chews 3 bites before swallowing, convinced it wards off fever. Another insists the roots must be gathered facing east, toward the rising sun, or they lose their power. These gestures cost nothing, but they bind the men together in a web of belief and routine, fragile shields against despair. At night, the coughing echoes through the tents, a chorus of rattling lungs that drowns out even the crackle of the fires. You lie awake, listening, counting breaths between the wheezes of the man beside you. The smell of damp wool, pine smoke, and bitter roots fills the air, heavy enough to press into your dreams. In those dreams, the mountain itself seems to breathe with you, exhaling frost, inhaling warmth, deciding who will wake in the morning. Morning comes anyway. Men rise slower, shoulders stooped, but still rise. A pot of root stew simmers over the coals, sending up a thin ribbon of steam. You sip from it, grimacing at the taste but grateful for the heat spreading through your chest. For a moment the cough eases, the ache dulls, and you feel strong enough to take another step. The march continues. Each crunch of boots is joined now by the rustle of roots tucked into belts, the faint chewing as men gnaw while walking. The mountain offers no mercy, but you steal small remedies from its soil, bitter gifts that may or may not heal. Whether the plants truly work or not almost doesn't matter because belief itself becomes medicine when survival depends on hope. And so you march, soot around your eyes, roots in your mouth, coughing into the wind. A strange army indeed, more herb-gatherer than warrior, but still moving forward, still alive, for now. You wake with your shoulders aching, not just from the weight of your pack, but from the prison you've been wearing all along. The moment you shift, you feel it, the plates of your armor, stiff and frozen, clinging to your body like an iron cage left out overnight. You tug at a strap, and it creaks, ice cracking along its length. You are supposed to be a soldier armed for battle, but today you feel like nothing more than a statue bound in chains. Written sources from medieval campaigns are clear on one thing: armor was both lifeline and curse in the cold. Mail links, usually so flexible, stiffened when snow melted into the rings and refroze, locking them like rusted chains. Plate armor turned into a personal icebox, metal drawing heat from the flesh until skin burned with frost. Knights who had once charged gloriously across battlefields found themselves hobbling, clumsy, fighting their own gear rather than the enemy. And yet you catch sight of something oddly human in these records too. One chronicler describes soldiers stuffing straw between layers of mail and padding, not just for warmth but to keep the iron from sticking to their skin. Another mentions men urinating on their own breastplates to melt the ice before strapping in again, laughing bitterly at the smell but glad for movement. Imagine that. The proud knight reduced to such an indignity just to keep his armor wearable in the morning chill. You tug your cloak aside and glance at your own gauntlets. The leather beneath is stiff, the rivets crusted with frost. You slide your hand in and feel the bite immediately, as though plunging into snow. Each flex of your fingers is slow, delayed, like the hands of a puppet pulled by frozen strings. Around you, others slap their arms against their bodies, shaking limbs to bring life back into them. The sound of metal rattling against metal fills the morning like a grim percussion. Scholarly opinion on how effective armor truly was in such conditions remains divided. Some argue that it still offered essential protection, even against the elements, by blocking wind and shielding flesh. Others counter that it caused more deaths than it prevented, slowing soldiers until they froze or fell. Evidence lies in scattered remarks. One scribe praising the resilience of knights in armor, another lamenting how many collapsed because their own breastplates had turned into coffins of ice. The march begins again. Your armor groans with each step, scraping and grinding, the cold echoing in your ears. You imagine yourself as a living bell, every movement ringing with clinks and clatters. The weight feels doubled in the thin air. You envy the poorer soldiers in patched wool, lighter and more flexible, while you carry the burden of metal that insists on reminding you of your supposed rank. Snow drifts down into the gaps between gorget and cloak, beneath the rim of your helmet. It melts on contact, then freezes again, a cycle of discomfort that no gesture can break. Your breath fogs inside the visor, condensing into droplets that turn to ice, clinging to lashes and beard alike. You raise the visor for air, only to feel the sting of wind whip your face raw. There is no winning, only choosing which misery to bear. At midday, the column halts by a cluster of rocks, and men pry at their armor with knives, scraping away the frost. One soldier holds his helmet over a fire, rotating it like a cooking pot, before daring to press it back over his skull. Another shakes his arms violently, muttering curses, then collapses onto the snow, too weary to move further. You watch him sink into stillness, his cuirass glinting faintly under the pale sun, until others drag him back up with rough shouts. The smell of metal is sharp in your nose, mingling with smoke and sweat. You run your tongue across your lips and taste iron, as if the armor itself has seeped into you. The sensation makes you wonder whether the mountain is slowly turning you into one of its statues, flesh hardened to metal, movement stilled until you are part of its eternal silence. Still, there are moments of dark comedy. One soldier clanks so loudly that others joke he could scare wolves away just by walking. Another slips on ice and lands flat on his back, unable to rise until two comrades haul him upright like a tipped turtle. Even here, in misery, laughter bubbles briefly, warming the group like a hidden ember. Night falls. You unbuckle your armor with stiff fingers, each strap a battle of its own. The padding beneath is damp, sour with sweat, and reeks of mildew. You lay the pieces beside you, frost already forming on their edges. They will be harder to don in the morning, but you dare not leave them. Unguarded armor is both curse and necessity. Without it, the enemy's arrow will find you. With it, the cold may take you first. You lie down, wrapping yourself in a cloak that smells of smoke and iron. The stars flicker faintly above, and you wonder if even they feel pity watching soldiers frozen inside their own armor. You drift into uneasy sleep, hearing in your dreams the ceaseless clink of metal, as if the chains follow you even into rest. Tomorrow, you will put it all back on. Tomorrow, you will march again, an unwilling statue trudging through snow. The mountain will test your strength, but your armor will test it more. And still, step after step, you will move forward, because stopping means becoming the very statue you already feel yourself to be. The mountain road narrows again, and you hear the groan of wood before you see it. A wagon lurches sideways, wheels frozen stiff, axle screaming in protest. The mule pulling it slips on the ice, brays in terror, and collapses into the snow. Men rush forward, tugging ropes, heaving at the load, cursing under their breath. But the wagon will not move. The mountain has claimed another victim, this time not a man but the lumbering skeleton of supply. Sources from the period describe this scene again and again. Wagons breaking under strain, animals stumbling to their deaths, supplies tumbling into ravines. What use is a carefully planned inventory when every jolt of the road can splinter a wheel? Chroniclers noted that even well-built carts faltered on the steep, icy passes. In the end, the army's lifeline of bread, arrows, tents and tools was held hostage by terrain more powerful than any commander. And there are the strange details that stick in the mind. One diary tells of soldiers stripping wagons piece by piece for firewood after they broke, preferring warmth over cargo. Another mentions that when beasts collapsed, their frozen carcasses were hacked apart for food, while the hides became makeshift coverings for men too poor to own cloaks. Imagine that. A wagon intended to deliver supplies ends up as fuel, and the animal that pulled it becomes both dinner and blanket. A grotesque recycling, yet also a testament to desperation's ingenuity. You watch now as men unload sacks from the broken cart, piling them on sledges that screech against the ice. Every handful of grain is precious, none can be wasted. But the mule is another matter. It lies on its side, sides heaving, hooves trembling. A soldier kneels, stroking its muzzle, whispering words too soft for you to catch. Then, with a grim efficiency, he draws a knife across its throat. The animal jerks once, then stills, steam curling into the frosty air. Silence falls, heavy and raw. The smell of blood spreads quickly, metallic and warm against the sterile cold. Men glance at each other, then at the carcass, and you see the calculation in their eyes. By nightfall, the meat will be roasting over fires, stringy but sustaining. No one cheers, no one jokes. They simply accept what hunger demands. Modern historians are divided about whether armies prepared for such inevitabilities. Some argue that commanders fully expected to lose wagons and animals, carrying contingencies for butchering and repurposing them. Others believe these decisions were born only in crisis, improvised by soldiers with no other choice. The truth likely shifts with each campaign, sometimes foreseen, often not, always tragic. The march resumes with fewer wagons now, more sledges pulled by weary men. You feel the weight in your shoulders, the straps digging deeper. Without beasts, the burden shifts to human backs. Every soldier becomes both fighter and mule, dragging the army inch by inch over stone and snow. The sound of squealing wheels is replaced by grunts, the dull slap of ropes against palms, the crunch of boots strained by extra loads. You stumble, nearly dropping your pack, and catch yourself against a rock. The cold bites harder with the added weight, sweat freezing against your skin. You glance back and see the lines stretching behind you. Men bent double, ropes biting into their shoulders, faces grim. It looks less like an army and more like a chain gang, bound not by law but by necessity. At camp that night, the broken wagon is remembered in silence. Fires sputter with pieces of its wood, warming hands as smoke curls upward. Strips of mule meat hiss on spits, the smell greasy and pungent. You chew slowly, the taste tough but oddly comforting. Hunger transforms even sorrow into sustenance. Around the fire, men trade quiet tales. One insists he saw ghosts lingering where the wagon fell, pale figures watching as the load was stripped away. Another swears the mule's bray will echo in his ears forever, louder than any horn. A third mutters that the mountain delights in stealing wheels, preferring armies crawl like insects instead of rolling freely. The laughter that follows is thin, but it carries a kernel of defiance. You lie back, staring at the stars through gaps in the smoke. The image of the broken cart lingers, wood splintered, grain spilled, mule stilled. It feels like a symbol of the march itself. Heavy loads, sudden collapse, grim adaptation. Tomorrow another wagon may fall, another beast may be butchered, but tomorrow you will still rise, shoulders bowed beneath what must be carried. And so the mountain teaches its lesson, one wheel at a time. Nothing rolls forever here. Every step must be earned with sweat, sacrifice, and loss. And yet, step by step, you move on. The camp stirs uneasily, not because of hunger this time, but because of light. Far across the ridge, faint threads of smoke rise against the dusk sky, thin lines twisting upward from fires that are not your own. Men notice first with curiosity, then with unease. Campfires always mean company, and in these mountains, company is rarely welcome. Accounts from the time emphasize this moment of tension. Soldiers often spotted distant plumes of smoke, never knowing whether they came from fellow travelers, local shepherds, or enemy scouts. Fires betrayed presence, warmth giving away position as surely as banners in daylight. Commanders faced the same dilemma every time: approach and risk ambush, or ignore and risk missing aid. Either choice carried weight heavy as ice. And yet, in the margins of chronicles, you find stories that complicate the picture. One tale tells of two armies, enemies sworn by oath, camping within sight of each other in the same valley. Too exhausted to fight, they simply kept to their fires, glaring across the snow until morning, then each continuing their separate way. Another mentions soldiers stumbling upon a village feast in the mountains, where locals welcomed both sides in exchange for coin, their tables laid with bread and cheese, as though war had never touched them. Smoke on a ridge could signal danger or supper. You stand now at the edge of your camp, cloak tight against the cold, eyes fixed on the distant glow. The wind carries faint scents, wood smoke, perhaps roasted meat, though it may be only your imagination conjuring comfort. Around you, men murmur in low voices, guessing who burns those fires. Some grip their weapons tighter, others cross themselves, all watching the horizon as if it might answer back. Your commander paces behind, weighing choices. Scouts are sent, their silhouettes melting into the dark. The rest of the camp waits, tense and restless, ears pricked for any sound beyond the crackle of their own flames. Every pop of firewood sounds suddenly like a threat. Scholars today disagree about how armies read these signals of smoke. Some argue they were trained to interpret patterns, size, rhythm, number of fires as coded messages of enemy presence. Others doubt this, suggesting it was guesswork dressed in hindsight. The truth is clouded by distance, as much for historians as it was for soldiers. The scouts return at last, breathless, eyes wide. Their report is short, not an army, but a cluster of huts. Locals huddled in the cold, their fires burning for survival. Relief washes through the camp, though suspicion lingers. Are they harmless peasants or allies of the enemy? The decision must be made before dawn. That night, the firelight flickers on wary faces. Some men joke bitterly that if it were the enemy, at least a fight would warm their blood. Others mutter that locals may be worse, charging outrageous prices for food or betraying the army for coin. The fires on the ridge burn steadily, indifferent to speculation, silent as stars. You sleep uneasily, dreaming of flames spreading across the mountainside, smoke filling the sky until it blots out the stars. When you wake, the real plumes still curl faintly in the distance, waiting like a question unanswered. At dawn, the column moves cautiously toward the village. The snow crunches louder than usual, every step deliberate, weapons close at hand. As the huts come into view, the fires are revealed. Small, ordinary, the kind meant for cooking stew, not signaling armies. A handful of villagers emerge, wrapped in ragged wool, eyes wary but not hostile. Relief floods the ranks, though pride keeps men from showing it. That evening, your own campfires burn higher, warmer, brighter. The distant plumes fade as smoke mingles with smoke, one valley filled with the shared breath of survival. For a night at least, enemy and friend blur, replaced by the universal truth of mountains in winter. Fire means life, and every living soul must keep it burning. By the time the army reaches the next valley, food is more valuable than gold. The march has burned through supplies, and the broken wagons left behind have robbed you of what little cushion remained. Men chew at scraps of leather, fingers trembling from hunger more than cold. So when the column stumbles across a scattering of huts tucked beneath the cliffs, every soldier's eyes light up with desperate hope. Medieval records repeatedly stress the importance of local trade in winter marches. Armies rarely carried enough to feed themselves for long. Even the best-planned campaigns assumed they would buy, barter, or seize provisions from the communities in their path. Salt, bread, cheese, dried fish, whatever peasants could spare, soldiers demanded. In return, they might offer coin, protection, or threats thinly veiled as promises. Survival turned armies into uneasy merchants, haggling in languages half understood. And yet, the little quirks in these encounters often linger more vividly than the contracts themselves. One account describes soldiers exchanging boots for shelter, literally giving away the very shoes on their feet in return for a night in a warm barn. Another mentions a commander who paid with salt rather than silver, because salt was more prized in the mountains than coin. Imagine offering a handful of crystals, gleaming like tiny jewels, and watching a peasant's eyes widen with gratitude. You stand now in the heart of the village, smoke curling from chimneys, the smell of stew drifting faintly. Peasants gather warily, clutching cloaks, their faces pale with both fear and hunger. They are no wealthier than you. Their children peer from doorways, eyes wide at the sight of armored men coated in frost. You realize quickly this is not a storehouse waiting to be plundered, but a fragile community on the edge of survival themselves. The negotiations begin. Officers step forward, speaking through translators or gesturing with hands. They offer coins which peasants eye suspiciously. In lands where silver means little and salt means life, coin is less valuable than a bag of grain. Some villagers point toward the cliffs, where goats bleat faintly, offering milk in exchange for tools or cloth. Others shake their heads, unwilling to part with what little keeps them alive. Historians remain divided about whether these exchanges leaned more toward cooperation or coercion. Some suggest armies respected local communities, knowing that goodwill meant reliable supplies. Others argue that soldiers often took what they needed, leaving villagers with nothing. The written sources are unreliable. Commanders preferred to describe generosity, while peasants left no records of their losses. The truth, as always, lies somewhere between charity and theft. You watch as a group of soldiers hand over a bundle of salt, receiving in return several rounds of hard cheese. The exchange looks almost ceremonial, salt grains glittering in the sunlight as coins of a different kind. Another pair of men barter with a farmer for shelter in his barn, promising to guard his goats from wolves during the night. Trust grows not from contracts, but from desperation, sealed by mutual need. The air is filled with smells unfamiliar to your weary nose. Fresh milk steaming in clay pots, hay piled thick in barns, smoke from hearth fires mingling with the bitter tang of snow. For a brief while, you feel the ache in your stomach soften. A villager presses a crust of bread into your hand, hard, small but real. You chew slowly, savoring every crumb, wondering if this moment of kindness will be remembered in their stories, or if tomorrow's hunger will erase it. Yet the encounter is not without tension. One soldier shouts angrily when refused more food. Another tries to slip into a barn without permission, only to be dragged out by his comrades. The line between trade and theft trembles thin as ice. The commander intervenes quickly, reminding the men that an army without allies in these mountains is already half defeated. Order is restored, but unease lingers in every glance. That night, the camp is warmer than it has been in days. Cheese and milk circulate, fires burn with wood bought from villagers, and a few lucky men sleep on straw in barns instead of snow. Laughter rises tentatively, the first in weeks not forced through clenched teeth. The village watches from a distance, silent, their own fires glowing faintly. Two communities share the same valley, bound together by necessity, separated by suspicion. As you lie back, full for the first time in days, you realize how survival in these passes is built not only on courage and faith, but on bargains struck in the cold. Salt traded for shelter, bread traded for coin, trust traded for time. Tomorrow the army will march on, leaving the villagers behind to face the mountains' indifference. But for this night, both soldier and peasant breathe easier, warmed by the fragile commerce of survival. The march wears on, and hunger is no longer the only emptiness gnawing at the men. There is another absence, quieter but no less painful, the silence of home. For days, weeks, months, soldiers in these frozen mountains trudged forward without word from families left behind. The letters they carried, if they carried any at all, rarely survived the snow. Messages vanished into storms, couriers lost in drifts, paper ruined by damp and frost. It was as though the mountains themselves swallowed voices, leaving soldiers to wonder whether anyone still thought of them beyond these ridges. Chroniclers hint at this void in passing. Campaign diaries mention letters dispatched but never answered, messages sealed in wax and handed to riders who never returned. One monk recorded that an army's correspondence was scattered as snow upon the wind, a poetic way of admitting most words were never delivered. The official records rarely dwell on this ache, but between the lines you sense it, loneliness woven into every frozen step. And yet, within that silence, peculiar details emerge. Some soldiers, unable to send letters, carved names into their shields or scratched initials onto tree trunks along the path, as if inscribing themselves into the land might bridge the distance. Others composed songs that mimicked letters, verses beginning with "My dearest" or "To the one I left," sung softly by campfires as though the mountain itself might carry the tune home. Picture weary men, faces blackened with soot and frost, singing lullabies not for comrades, but for wives and children hundreds of miles away. You sit by the fire now, parchment in your lap, quill trembling in frozen fingers. You write slowly, ink thick and sluggish, words blotched where the nib sticks. You begin with assurances, "I am alive," and end with questions you know will never be answered. Will they read these lines? Will the letter ever reach them? You tuck it away anyway, because the act of writing is its own comfort, a way of remembering that a world beyond the snow still exists. Scholarly opinion diverges on how effective medieval armies' communication systems were. Some argue they were surprisingly sophisticated, with relay riders and coded signals keeping commanders in touch across vast distances. Others counter that such systems collapsed in mountains, where weather and terrain shredded any line of contact. The truth lies buried in a few surviving letters, fragments of longing, scraps of strategy, broken sentences that stop abruptly as if the page itself froze mid-thought. In camp, men murmur about their families. One describes a child he left barely walking, now surely old enough to run. Another wonders whether his farm survived the winter without him. A third admits he cannot remember his wife's face clearly anymore, the edges blurred by snow and time. Each confession is half-whispered, because to speak too loudly of absence is to invite despair. You glance upward. Smoke from your fire twists into the sky, joining the clouds that drift toward valleys unseen. For a moment you imagine the smoke carrying your thoughts across ridges, down rivers, over fields, until it reaches home like a ghostly letter. It is foolish, perhaps, but no more foolish than singing to absent children or carving names into bark. The mountain may devour paper and riders, but it cannot silence memory. Night deepens. You unfold your parchment once more, running your finger over the words. The ink has smudged, but the meaning remains, proof that in this frozen wilderness you still remember warmth. Around you, men clutch scraps of parchment, lockets, carved tokens, whatever links them to absent voices. Some kiss them before sleeping, others hide them deep in cloaks as though afraid the wind might steal them away. And in the morning, the march resumes, the letters tucked close to the heart. Few will ever reach their destination, but the act of writing, of believing in a future audience, keeps feet moving. The silence of home may stretch unbroken, but hope echoes louder than snow. The snow grows thinner as you climb, but the road doesn't grow clearer. The path bends and twists, often disappearing altogether beneath drifts or rocky slides. In daylight you can sometimes follow footprints, wagon ruts, or the faint line of a trail carved by those who passed before. But when storms sweep in, those signs vanish. And when the sky darkens and the earth is swallowed by white, you find yourself looking upward for guidance. Medieval accounts often mention how armies turned to the heavens when the land betrayed them. Navigating by the stars was not only for sailors at sea. Soldiers in mountain passes relied on constellations to anchor their direction when trails blurred. The North Star, steadfast and unblinking, became as important to an army as its commander. Without it, men risked circling endlessly, burning precious strength until the mountain claimed them. Yet alongside the practical use of stars comes an almost mystical attachment. Some chronicles describe soldiers whispering that constellations shifted deliberately, tricking them, punishing them for arrogance. Others swore that Orion's belt pointed the way to safety, while the Pleiades warned of storms. Imagine men huddled on a ridge, staring at the same sky you know today, but believing each glittering dot was either friend or foe. You tilt your head back now, breath fogging into the night. The stars blaze brighter than you've ever seen, unclouded by smoke or city light. They feel so close you could almost touch them, so sharp against the dark that they sting your eyes. You trace the patterns you know, Ursa Major, curving into the horizon, Cassiopeia sprawled like a crooked throne, the pole star steady in the north. For a moment, the world feels less chaotic, as if you are walking a map written across the heavens. But the mountain has its tricks. Clouds slide in quickly, smothering the sky until only a few stars flicker weakly. The men mutter uneasily, some crossing themselves, others swearing. Without the sky, direction feels suddenly fragile. The column slows, every boot heavy with hesitation. Historians continue to debate just how skilled soldiers were in celestial navigation. Some argue they received training, at least rudimentary, enough to use major constellations. Others believe only a handful of guides or officers could read the stars, while most men followed blindly. The surviving evidence suggests both possibilities: orders that mention night marches guided by stars, and anecdotes of soldiers wandering hopelessly when skies turned dark. Around the campfire, stories emerge. One soldier claims his grandfather taught him to read the heavens like a book, each star a letter telling the path. Another insists the stars are souls of the dead, guiding those still alive. The debate grows lively, voices rising until laughter breaks through. In the middle of hunger and frost, even arguing about stars becomes a kind of warmth. You lie back on the snow, cloak spread beneath you, staring upward. The stars wheel slowly, eternal and indifferent, while you cling to them like lifelines. You wonder if someone far away is looking at the same constellations tonight, tracing the same shapes. Perhaps that thought alone is enough to bridge distance, a silent message written in light. Morning comes grey and clouded. The stars are gone, hidden, but their memory lingers. You rise, adjusting your pack, and follow the line forward. The path remains uncertain, but the knowledge that a map exists above, even unseen, steadies your steps. For in these mountains, stars are more than light. They are anchors of hope, proof that beyond the snow and silence, there is still a pattern, still an order, still something permanent in a world that tries daily to erase you. The path bends sharply, and suddenly you hear it, the hollow groan of timber under strain. Ahead lies a bridge, strung like a scar across the gorge, its planks covered in snow, its ropes stiff with frost. You pause, staring at the fragile construction, and wonder how many men it has carried or claimed. The gorge yawns below, wind whistling through the chasm, promising a fall no human body could survive. Written accounts from winter campaigns describe these crossings with a mix of dread and awe. Soldiers recorded how bridges swayed in storms, how ice clung to ropes until they were as rigid as iron, how each step felt like testing fate. For an army hauling supplies and animals, such crossings were nightmares. Yet they were unavoidable. Without bridges, entire campaigns would stall at cliffs, defeated not by enemies but by empty air. And then, in the margins of chronicles, you glimpse oddities that linger. One source tells of soldiers crawling across on all fours, too terrified to walk upright, their armor clinking like frightened beetles. Another mentions men blindfolding themselves before stepping on, convinced that seeing the drop would undo them faster than the fall itself. Picture an army of hardened warriors, eyes covered like children playing games, shuffling inch by inch over a creaking span. You step onto the planks now, They creak instantly, snow crunching beneath your boots, the sound hollow and thin. The ropes hum in the wind, vibrating like harp strings. You grip them tightly, fingers numb inside stiff gloves, and force yourself forward. Every sway makes your stomach lurch. Every groan of timber echoes in your chest. The smell of resin clings to the air, mingling with cold stone and the metallic tang of fear. The column moves slowly, one man at a time, distance kept between each to lighten the load. A mule balks at the entrance, braying in panic, eyes rolling. Soldiers tug its ropes, shouting encouragement and curses, until finally it steps forward. Each hoof thuds loudly, each pause stretching time thin. The bridge sways harder, the ropes creak louder, and you can feel the collective breath of the column held tight. Academic debate persists over how often medieval armies built versus found these bridges. Some historians argue that engineers within armies crafted temporary crossings, lashing timbers and ropes in place. Others suggest they relied more on existing village spans, crude constructions never meant for thousands of feet. The record is unclear, just fragments describing the passage of the gorge or the perilous crossing, leaving us to imagine details filled with creaks and prayers. Halfway across, a gust of wind tears down the gorge, ripping through cloaks and helmets. The bridge lurches sideways, ropes shuddering. You cling desperately, chest pressed to the icy rope, breath ragged. A soldier ahead slips, his boot skidding on ice. He crashes to his knees, arms flailing, and for a heartbeat, the column gasps in unison. Two men grab him, hauling him upright, dragging him onward. The bridge holds, but the fear lingers like a shadow. At last, your boots touch stone again. You stumble onto the far side, knees weak, hands raw from clutching the ropes. Behind you, the line still shuffles, figures swaying like leaves on a string. Relief spreads slowly, like thawing fingers, fragile, fleeting, but real. That night, campfires burn brighter than usual. Men laugh louder, voices breaking with the release of tension. Stories fly about who slipped, who cursed, who kissed the planks in relief. Some joke they would rather face an enemy's blade than another bridge. The sound of laughter is jagged, nervous, but it warms the night as surely as the flames. You lie back, staring upward, still feeling the sway of the bridge in your bones. The memory will not leave easily, the creak of timber, the groan of ropes, the abyss yawning below. You realize the mountain fights not only with snow and storm, but with emptiness itself, daring you to cross where no ground exists. Tomorrow the path will continue. Another ridge, another trial. But tonight you rest, alive, the chasm behind you, the bridge still holding. The wind is relentless, tearing through cloaks, battering tents, howling like some great beast that refuses to sleep. In such chaos, commands shouted by officers vanish instantly. A soldier 3 paces away hears nothing but the storm. Yet the column must move, and in the mountains, where a line can stretch for miles, some way to keep men together must exist. That way comes not from words, but from sound more primal, the steady beat of drums. Accounts from various campaigns describe how rhythm became the skeleton of an army on the march. Drums carried farther than voices, even against the roar of blizzards or the echoes of valleys. One source from a Burgundian expedition claims the drummer's hands never ceased, even while frostbitten, because silence meant collapse. Another mentions horns used in tandem, but it was the drums, the heartbeat of wood and hide, that gave shape to footsteps. And then, of course, come the curious details that give texture. Chroniclers sometimes wrote of drummers stuffing straw or wool inside the shells of their instruments to prevent the skins from splitting in the cold. One story tells of men warming drumheads over fire each morning, risking cracks and burns, just to ensure they would not sag in the damp air. Imagine the absurd sight: half-frozen soldiers huddled around a fire, not to heat themselves, but to keep their instruments alive. You hear them now. Boom, boom, slow, steady, deliberate. The sound cuts through the wind, each strike guiding boots forward. Men fall into step instinctively, their strides syncing with the rhythm. You feel your own heartbeat begin to match, your body carried by the pulse. The snow still drags at your ankles, the cold still bites your face, but the beat dulls the misery. It is a tether in the storm, a rope of sound binding you to the line. The scholars who examine such practices often disagree about how much discipline drums truly enforced. Some argue they kept order brilliantly, preventing chaos even in near blindness. Others think they offered more comfort than control, giving men something familiar to cling to when the world became white and endless. What both sides acknowledge is the sheer psychological weight of rhythm. Even unwilling feet can be tricked into marching by a drum. The path winds downward briefly, and the snow muffles the echoes, so the beats sound closer, almost intimate. You catch the figure of the drummer ahead, a boy no older than 16, cheeks hollow, hands raw, striking with a focus that looks more trance than strength. His drumhead shivers with each strike, but he never misses the beat. Soldiers glance at him as they pass, nodding slightly as if he alone holds the column together. At night the drums do not fall silent. They are struck softer, in intervals, to mark time within the camp. Each beat reminds the men of order, of routine, of something stable in the shifting chaos of snow. You drift to sleep hearing it low, steady, almost like a lullaby. But not all feel comfort. One soldier mutters that the drums echo too loudly, carrying far, telling enemies where the camp lies. Another insists the rhythm wakes the spirits of the mountains, that each boom is an insult demanding vengeance. Fear and faith twist around the sound, but still the drums continue, because without them, the line dissolves. You wake before dawn, frost clinging to your lashes, and there it is again. Boom, boom, boom. It rolls through the valley like the pulse of the earth itself. You rise, shoulders aching, feet blistered, and fall into step. Your body remembers the rhythm before your mind does. The march stretches endlessly, but the beat persists. It drowns hunger. It masks pain. It binds you to those ahead and behind. You may forget the faces of men beside you, but you will not forget the drumbeat. It is the sound of survival, the sound that carries you through mountains, determined to scatter you into silence. And so you walk, boots crunching in time, breath pluming with each strike, the storm still raging but no longer master. The drums own you now, and strangely, you are grateful. The farther you march, the more you notice how men lean not only on food, fire, and rhythm, but also on belief in omens, in charms, in anything that suggests the mountain has rules rather than random cruelty. When survival feels like a coin toss, people begin to search for patterns in every gust of wind, every flicker of light. Chroniclers make frequent note of such practices. Soldiers tied charms to their belts, wore saints' medals around their necks, or carried small relics hidden in pouches. Yet, beyond official religion, the march was filled with quieter, stranger rituals. Some men refused to step first onto a frozen river, waiting until a comrade tested the ice. Others spat into snow before lying down, convinced it appeased spirits dwelling beneath. These were not written in handbooks or orders. They were whispered traditions, passed from one cold body to another. And then there are the more peculiar accounts that linger. One tale speaks of soldiers refusing to eat white food, milk, cheese, even pale bread during storms, fearing it would invite the snow to follow them inside. Another mentions men carrying raven feathers, plucked from birds seen circling the peaks, believed to guard against avalanches. Picture an army trudging along, half-starved, cloaks ragged, yet carefully clutching a black feather as though it were armor. You see it now all around you. A soldier presses a tiny wooden charm to his lips before every climb. Another murmurs the same phrase under his breath at every mile marker, too low for others to hear. A group pauses to knot strips of cloth on a branch at a crossroads, tokens fluttering in the wind like ghostly banners. None of these actions delay the march, yet each seems vital, as though neglecting them would be an invitation for disaster. Modern scholars argue over how seriously to take these superstitions. Some insist they were central, holding morale together in ways commanders could not. Others dismiss them as background noise, embellishments in chronicles meant to color otherwise bleak narratives. The surviving evidence, though, suggests belief was no trivial matter. Men froze, starved, and died, but they also carried charms, whispered prayers, and avoided unlucky numbers of steps. The line between faith and fear blurred until both became the same. The mountain itself seems to respond. The wind rises suddenly, sending a howl through the valley that makes men cross themselves in unison. A raven passes overhead, wings stark against the snow, and soldiers pause to watch, each interpreting the sight differently: good luck, bad luck, or merely a reminder that life still moves freely above while they trudge below. You realize how fragile rational thought becomes when every step could end in silence. At night, around the fires, stories spread. One soldier swears he saw a figure in white walking alongside the column, vanishing whenever he turned his head. Another insists the mountain takes men one by one until paid in full, and that charms only delay the debt. The laughter that follows is nervous, too sharp, but it binds the group together. Even fear can be communal warmth. You lie awake, cloak pulled tight, listening to the whispers. You glance at your own hand, where a strip of cloth is tied around your wrist, a charm you had dismissed at first but now find yourself unwilling to remove. It is frayed, damp, useless in any practical sense, but still you keep it. Because in the mountains, when breath freezes in your throat and stars vanish behind clouds, sometimes the smallest scrap of superstition feels stronger than iron. The dawn comes, pale and unforgiving. Men rise slowly, each touching charms, muttering words, following rituals that seem foolish in daylight but essential nonetheless. The march resumes, steps falling into rhythm with drums, eyes darting to sky and slope alike, searching for signs. You know the mountain is indifferent. You know charms do not alter the snow, but you also know belief is warmth, and warmth is survival. And so you walk, half armored by faith, half by superstition, wholly by the need to believe the mountain has rules that can be bargained with. Whether or not that's true, the act of believing is enough to keep your legs moving through the endless white. The line crawls upward again, boots crunching into snow that seems to stretch without end. Men bend forward under the weight of their packs, faces hollow, eyes fixed only on the patch of ground before them. They would falter, perhaps even collapse, if not for the voice that rises above the storm. The commander rides near the front, cloak snapping in the wind, words carrying down the column like sparks in darkness. He promises what every soldier longs to hear, that beyond the pass lies warmth, food, and triumph. Contemporary records reveal how essential such proclamations were. Leaders understood that cold, hunger, and exhaustion sapped strength faster than any enemy blade. So they fed their armies hope. Charlemagne, Hannibal, and countless nameless captains spoke of victories waiting just beyond the ridge, treasures in the valleys below, or enemies trembling at their approach. Chroniclers often note these speeches with reverence, as though words alone lifted men over mountains. But buried in the margins of those same accounts are details less grand. One scribe writes of a commander promising not victory, but wine-insisting barrels waited in the next village. Another recalls officers telling tales of warm baths and soft beds, fabrications spun to keep legs moving. Imagine an army dragging itself upward, not dreaming of glory but of simple comforts. A loaf of bread still steaming, a roof that does not leak. The grand banners of conquest shrank into whispers of survival. You hear the voice now. It is hoarse, cracked from days of shouting, but still it cuts through the wind. The commander paints visions with each breath. Green valleys filled with orchards, towns with market stalls heavy with bread, villages where fires burn bright and bellies are full. He swears you are close, that one more ridge will reveal it. And though you know mountains stretch on endlessly, part of you clings to the picture. It is a story worth walking for. Historians remain divided on how effective such speeches truly were. Some argue they were indispensable, the only glue that kept armies intact in conditions so brutal. Others believe soldiers rolled their eyes behind lowered brows, trudging not from belief but from fear of punishment. Both views carry truth. Some men surely marched on dreams of victory. Others marched because halting meant death. But all marched, and perhaps that was all commanders required. The column stirs with murmurs. A soldier near you mutters that he will drink a river dry once the valley comes. Another swears he can already smell bread baking. A third, more cynical, chuckles bitterly, claiming the only thing beyond the pass is another mountain. Yet even he continues, his steps steady. Doubt may cool the heart, but it cannot freeze legs already moving. The wind whips harder, tearing at cloaks, yet the promise lingers. You imagine valleys full of smoke from chimneys, orchards glittering with frost but heavy with apples, taverns echoing with laughter. The picture feels absurd here among cliffs and silence, yet it is enough. For a moment your hunger dulls, your boots feel lighter, your breath comes easier. At camp that night, the commander walks the fires, repeating his assurances. He bends to speak with men individually, clapping shoulders, swearing that glory lies just beyond tomorrow. You watch faces lift slightly, shadows of smiles flicker. Even those who doubt take comfort in the ritual. Hope, even false, warms more than any cloak. You lie back, staring at smoke curling into the night sky. The stars are faint, hidden by drifting clouds, but the commander's words still echo. Perhaps tomorrow you will find valleys filled with orchards, or perhaps only more snow. It does not matter. The promise itself has kept you alive one more day, and in these mountains, that is victory enough. The mountain has been patient, but patience has its price. You sense it in the sag of men's shoulders, the hollow stare in their eyes, the way boots drag instead of lifting. Each ridge conquered leaves fewer bodies to press forward. Some fall in storms, others to hunger, others simply lie down and never rise. The army begins to resemble a river that grows thinner with every mile, spilling lives into the snow as naturally as water seeps into cracks. Sources from the period do not gloss over this toll. Chroniclers list casualties as though tallying coins, noting how many perished from cold before a single arrow was loosed. Monks writing far from the passes describe the mountain taking its tithe, a grim acknowledgement that every winter march was paid in flesh. Leaders could plan rations, routes, and banners, but they could not bargain with the peaks. The cold collected its due relentlessly. Among those records, however, lurk smaller, stranger images. One account describes men building cairns of stones over frozen bodies, not to bury them, but to keep wolves from gnawing the flesh. Another notes soldiers marking the snow with crosses of ash, as if staking claims against the mountain itself. A third mentions comrades, whispering the names of the fallen into the wind, convinced the gusts would carry them home. These details feel more human than the tallies, grief expressed in gestures fragile as breath. You see it now all around you. A soldier stumbles, falls, and this time does not rise. His comrades pause, then press on. One man kneels briefly, placing a scrap of cloth over the still face before moving again. The line cannot stop long, not for a single man. Each life is honored in seconds, then abandoned for the sake of the living. The snow swallows the body quickly, erasing footsteps as if he never walked there at all. Historians continue to wrestle with numbers. Some argue casualties from winter marches were exaggerated, inflated by scribes eager to magnify suffering. Others counter that records downplay losses, commanders unwilling to admit how many they sacrificed to ambition. The truth likely lies somewhere between. Not every story is accurate, but neither is every silence. What remains certain is that the mountain claimed lives freely, and armies paid the price. You trudge forward, haunted by the sounds. The crunch of boots is often interrupted by a softer noise, the thud of a body hitting snow. It is quiet, almost polite, a sound too small for the enormity it represents. Each time men flinch, glance, then move on. The rhythm of the march does not pause. At night, the camp grows emptier. Fires burn smaller, the circles around them thinner. The laughter that once flickered now fades almost completely, replaced by silence broken only by coughs and the snap of wood. You sit close to the flames, watching shadows stretch across faces gaunt and unfamiliar. Hunger and frost carve men into strangers long before death claims them. Yet even here, gestures of remembrance persist. One soldier produces a scrap of parchment, writing down the names of those lost that day, though the ink freezes and smears. Another recites prayers aloud, his voice cracking but steady, each name given back to the night. These acts do not bring men back, but they assert something stubborn, that lives will not vanish without trace, even if only in whispers. The smell of the camp shifts too. Once heavy with smoke and leather, now it carries hints of decay where bodies lie unburied just beyond the circle of firelight. The cold preserves them, but still the air feels touched by death. You pull your cloak tighter, but no fabric shields against that scent. You lie awake, staring at the stars through gaps in cloud. For each one that flickers, you think of a man left behind that day, his story now only a footnote in chronicles unwritten. You wonder how many more will join him before the valley comes. The mountain has taken its tithe, and you know it will demand more before releasing the army. Yet still, you rise at dawn. Still, you walk. Because even as men fall, the line must move, one boot after another, dragging memory forward through the snow. The ridge dips at last, and for the first time in weeks the air tastes different. It is still cold, still sharp, but beneath it lies another note. Smoke not from your own campfires, but drifting up from valleys ahead. You pause, nostrils flaring, and catch the faintest trace of something else, wood burning clean, maybe even food cooking somewhere far below. The promise of life presses against your senses like a tide, stirring men from their stupor. Medieval chronicles occasionally pause at these moments of relief. Writers describe the sudden burst of energy that swept through armies when they glimpsed green slopes after endless white. One monk likened it to souls thawing, as if bodies frozen in despair melted at the first sign of valleys. Another, more bluntly, wrote that the smell of hearth smoke gave men legs like deer, pushing them forward faster than any drum. But along with the joy came peculiar little details. A surviving letter describes soldiers stumbling into villages so eager for food that they burned their tongues on bowls of stew, laughing through the pain. Another tells of men kissing the ground of valley fields, ignoring the mud that smeared their faces. Imagine hardened warriors, cloaks ragged, armor dented, groveling on their knees in gratitude to dirt. These were not gestures of ceremony, but of raw survival. You see it now in the men around you. Shoulders straighten, steps quicken, even eyes brighten as plumes of smoke rise in the distance. Someone swears he hears church bells carried faintly on the wind. Another insists he smells bread, though it is surely imagination. Hope reshapes bodies as much as food ever could. Yet historians caution that valleys were not always salvation. Some argue that emerging from the pass often meant stumbling straight into danger ambushes waiting in fertile ground, villages unwilling or unable to share supplies. Others remind us that armies sometimes reached valleys only to find them barren, stripped by earlier forces or ruined by winter. Relief was not guaranteed. It was a gamble. Still, the psychological weight of reaching lower ground was immense. The descent begins, and you feel the change immediately. The snow thins, replaced by patches of brown earth, damp and fragrant after weeks of sterile white. Meltwater trickles down rocks, the sound delicate as music. The air feels heavier, rich with scents you had nearly forgotten: pine needles, damp soil, smoke from unseen hearths. Each step downward is a step back into life. The column quickens. Soldiers who had shuffled sluggishly now stride, muttering to each other, even daring to laugh. Packs still weigh heavy, armor still clinks, but the drag of despair lifts slightly. You hear jokes about ale waiting in taverns, about women at firesides, about beds that don't collapse beneath snow. Each word is half fantasy, half promise. You reach a clearing, and the view opens. Below lies a valley dotted with cottages, thin trails of smoke rising into the pale sky. Fields lie dormant under frost, but they are fields nonetheless flat, workable, human. You hear a murmur ripple down the line, a sound half sigh, half prayer. Some men cross themselves, others simply gape, as though seeing the earth for the first time. By nightfall, the army makes camp at the valley's edge. Fires burn stronger, wood easier to find, flames dancing higher. The smell of smoke fills the air, mingling with laughter, with coughing, with the faint, fragile sound of relief. You taste it in your stew, still thin but flavored with roots and herbs scavenged nearby. It is not abundance, but it is no longer starvation. You lie back, staring up at a sky less hostile, stars twinkling above the valley's shelter. The mountains loom behind you, silent, vast, but for the first time they feel like something conquered rather than endured. Tomorrow may bring new trials, new enemies, new hungers. But tonight, the valley smoke drifts above you like a benediction, a fragile signal that the world has not ended beyond the snow. You drift towards sleep, body lighter, lungs fuller. The journey is not finished, but the worst of the mountains lies behind. Ahead is soil, fire, and the smell of life returning. The valley welcomes you with silence more profound than any blizzard. Snow still clings to the ridges, but the air feels different, less hostile, edged with the faint smell of earth and wood smoke. You pause at the boundary where rock and snow yield to frozen fields, and for the first time in weeks, you sense the mountain loosening its grip. The line of soldiers behind you stumbles into the open, their cloaks ragged, boots torn, faces hollow. You realize this is not triumph so much as survival, fragile and incomplete. Medieval accounts often describe such arrivals in subdued tones. Armies emerging from winter passes rarely looked like victors. They looked like survivors, reduced in number, gaunt and weary, dragging broken sledges behind them. Chroniclers note how commanders reported successful crossings, but the truth lived in the gaps. Men buried along ridges, wagons splintered in ravines, animals left stiff in snow. The mountains gave passage, yes, but only after demanding their toll. And then there are the stranger echoes of memory. Some soldiers, once safe in valleys, carved symbols into trees or rocks as though to mark their survival. Others gathered stones from the pass, carrying them as talismans long after the march ended. One account tells of knights who refused to remove their soot masks even after reaching safety, believing the mountain's glare would blind them again if they did. Habits born of hardship clung long after the danger had passed. You walk now through the valley, boots sinking into soil softened by thaw. The smell of wood smoke grows stronger, no longer just imagination but reality. Cottages ahead, fires burning, life continuing. Villagers watch cautiously as the army limps past, eyes wide at the sight of men more ghost than flesh. Children whisper, pointing at cloaks stiff with frost, at faces darkened by soot, at armor dulled by ice. For them, the soldiers are not heroes but wanderers returned from some other world. Modern historians debate what these crossings meant in the broader sweep of strategy. Some argue they were decisive, proving the resilience of armies that could outlast even nature. Others see them as folly, costly gambles that drained strength before battles even began. The records themselves rarely settle the question. All they leave behind are fragments, names of commanders, tallies of losses, and the occasional vivid description of snow, smoke, and silence. What is certain is this: every march left scars deeper than ink could show. At camp that night, the fires are warmer, the food heavier in your belly, bread is soft again, ale liquid instead of slush. The men laugh not loudly, not fully, but enough to sound alive. Songs drift upward, rough and uneven, yet carrying notes of gratitude. You sit by the flames, cloak wrapped close, and let the warmth seep into bones you thought permanently frozen. The smoke curls into the night, blending with the stars. Yet even in this relief, you cannot forget. The images linger, the mule collapsing beside a broken wagon, the avalanche erasing comrades in seconds, the faces of frozen men left as markers on the path. The mountain is behind you, but it is also inside you now, carved into memory like frost into stone. You know that years from now, long after battles are fought and won or lost, you will still dream of white silence and the creak of snow beneath boots. You stretch out by the fire, eyes heavy. Around you, men snore softly, cloaks rising and falling with steady breath. The night is calm, the valley protective, the mountain distant. You close your eyes, letting the warmth cradle you, knowing tomorrow the march will continue on different roads. But tonight, at least, you rest. And so, as your breathing slows and the story softens, let the images fade gently. Picture the valley smoke rising into the pale sky, curling above fields where snow slowly melts, drifting higher until it disappears among the stars. Imagine the soldiers, once bent and broken, now lying by fires, their bodies heavy with exhaustion but finally eased. They are not triumphant, not yet, but they are alive, and that is its own kind of victory. You feel the rhythm of their march still lingering, like a drumbeat far away, steady and slow. It matches your heartbeat, calming it, turning each thud into reassurance. The mountains remain vast and indifferent, but for now they are behind you. What lies ahead is uncertain, yet no longer as cruel. You are moving forward, step by step, toward valleys where warmth waits. Let your body sink, like snow settling after a storm. Let the sounds around you quiet, the cold soften into comfort. Whatever battles linger in your mind, set them down by the fire. Breathe deeply, slowly, and let the weight of the mountain lift from your shoulders. Sleep now, carried on the memory of survival. The path is long, but for tonight you are safe. The stars shine steady overhead, and the valley holds you in silence. Sweet dreams.